Welcome to George Washington Speaks. I'm your host, Tom Saffold. We've seen in earlier editions how the Washington family prospered in Virginia colony and how young George hoped to follow his father and brothers with a good English education and prospects for a good marriage. Now, George Washington, portrayed by Vern Frykholm, will share the darkest moment of his young life.
On April 12, 1743, my father died. He was only 49 years old, much younger than I am now. The consequences of his death rippled through our family, and it devastated me. With each passing month after his death, I began to get a clearer sense of what his death meant in terms of our future. It totally changed the world that I knew. My eldest half-brother, Lawrence, inherited the Little Hunting Creek plantation and house, and Augustine inherited the Pope plantation and house and my father's mining interest in the Accokeek iron furnace business. I, being the third and eldest of my father's second marriage, inherited the Ferry Farm. Both the Little Hunting Creek and the Pope plantations were not only self-supporting, but they produced an annual income well beyond the expenses to run the business. The Ferry Farm, on the other hand, had only 400 to 600 acres of poor soils, and had never paid for itself. Consequently, income from my father's other businesses, while he was still alive, was needed to feed and clothe the family, workers, and slaves. Typically, when a husband or a wife dies, and the spouse is left with several children and many financial needs, it is necessary for that remaining spouse to remarry. A husband needed a wife to raise the children and run the home, while the wife needed a husband to financially provide for and protect the family. Both had to work constantly to make ends. If a widow had profitable assets associated with her, she was generally well sought after. If not, but if she was generally agreeable and the need for child care by a widower was adequate, a good match could soon be obtained to the benefit of both. However, my mother did not remarry, which caused a financial hardship for our family. Not only did she not have valuable assets to bring to a new marriage, but she had 5 children to feed, and the eldest being only 11. Additionally, she had very strong convictions about life, possibly too strong to make her an agreeable marriage partner. As far as we children were concerned, she was a caring mother. She had definite ideas about how best to raise children and how they should be disciplined. We both loved her devoted concern for us and feared her disapproval. She was a very devout woman and brought us up reading Scripture and honoring God. She did have her own ways, which my father accepted and we children accepted. As an adult, I cannot recall any suitors visiting the Ferry Farm, but knowing my mother as I do now, I imagine that other men may not have been so inclined to adapt to my mother's ways as well as my father did. Since there was not enough income to pay for even our basic needs, my mother was forced to supplement the meager earnings of the farm with other monies and assets that my father bequeathed to her. Over 5 years, those funds were used judiciously to feed us, to buy seed to plant, to repair the fences, and buildings to supplement the feed and care for the chickens, pigs, goats, sheep, cattle, horses, and such. All of this meant that there was little money left for the niceties as new clothing, never mind the latest fashions, nor was there money for education, whether academic or social etiquette. The education I looked forward to at Appleby's school in England, which my two older brothers had attended, was out of the question. A proper introduction into Virginia society that would have come through my father's positions as a burgess, military leader, and warden of the Anglican Church evaporated. My mother was a wonderful mother, and many in Fredericksburg greatly loved her because of her piety and service to anyone in need. However, since she was not one to seek the vain frivolities of Virginia and Fredericksburg society, her help in that regard was limited. We would have to look elsewhere for that type of education. My two older brothers had all they needed to enter into Virginia society, but I was bereft of those advantages. Without social connections, I would not be considered for appointments within the Virginia government or the militia. Additionally, I would not be viewed as a good candidate for marriage to the daughter of even a lower gentry family. My expectations to further the Washington social status and wealth were bleak at best. Without any of these advantages, the future of my father's family line through me might slip into even a lower social class. My father's line through my mother might even become so obscure that no one would remember the name of Washington. I did not know it at the time, but we were on the verge of repeating the fate of my great-great-grandfather Lawrence's misfortunes during the English Civil War, when he was defrocked and died in poverty and was unknown. In the 2 to 3 years following my father's death, my mother was unshakable in her faith and her mothering of her children. She did the best she could to manage the farm, but her propensity to just get by rather than risk our limited funds for improvements showed her lack of business sense and an aversion to taking risks. Her faith, her personal strength, and constant moral admonitions to me continued to lay the foundation of my life that I would eventually accept as my own and live by. She affirmed verbally and by her example the importance of family, that my commitment to family should be the first and foremost, even above my own wants and needs. She acknowledged the importance of our English heritage and our obligation to the crown. We must do our part as gentry of Virginia to support the king. And she avowed the importance of our Anglican faith as the underlying foundation for our family, our national loyalty, and our lives. Those three pillars of family, country, and God continued to be a theme that was developed in me through my life and influenced all that I did.
After the loss of his father, George began to look to his older half-brothers for leadership and guidance. Although they did not secure for him the education he had hoped for, the next edition will reveal some of the help they provided. Thanks for watching.